Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. I know, like many people across the world, we've been watching the Kyle Rittenhouse trial in Kenosha, and it's been a very fascinating experience, especially yesterday, November 10th. I think many people around the world were watching intently when they saw this.
Why would you think that that made it okay for you, without any advance notice, to bring this matter before the jury? I was astonished when you began your examination by commenting on the defendant's post-arrest silence. That's basic law. It's been basic law in this country for 40 years, 50 years. I have no idea why you would do something like that. And it gives... I'll leave it at that.
I think everyone has had an opportunity to see that is watching the actual trial. Although if you were watching the mainstream news media, you probably saw something very different. You've probably read headlines that were very different. But while the attention of the entire world was on the Kenosha trial, while many people were speaking about the chance of a mistrial with prejudice, there were other news items that were going on that many people missed throughout the entire world. In fact, one of the stories that we found later and that many people may have missed on November 10th was in fact this story that you may have seen. It was trending on Twitter for part of the day, and that is the from Breezy Scroll, Canadian woman becomes world's first patient to be diagnosed with climate change. Read that again. The first patient to be diagnosed with climate change. Now, I want to be very clear. They're talking about actual climate change. This is something that we need to talk about and should be something that you have heard about, but again, you may have missed it. Now, before we get into that, we do want to mention that if this is the first time that you are seeing the channel, we want to welcome you and thank you for joining our audience. We also want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on YouTube and Facebook, Twitter, and DLive, essentially all the social media that we can that the internet overlords will allow, to hear your voice, to hear your tweets, your chats, and to take your phone calls from anywhere around the world to speak about the issues that matter to you, that you want to discuss and have your voice on. Because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your inalienable right to free speech, no matter what country you may be in, whether your government agrees, whether the internet overlords agree or not. We believe in your First Amendment right. And we look forward to hearing you share your free speech with us every Sunday in our live stream at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we hope that you'll be joining us this Sunday. So let's look at this issue that's really quite troubling when you think about it. Climate change. I mean, have you ever heard anyone mention climate change as a health issue, as an individual health issue, as a cause of significant health issues, potentially death for an individual? Because we've been seeing over the years many politicians and many individuals who would like to claim to be scientists or quoting scientific fact have been leading us toward this idea for some time. In fact, if we go back in time, in October of 2009, so over 10 years ago, we first wrote about this in reference to Al Gore and the Inconvenient Truth movie that he had put out, which has been debunked since that time. And we were talking about the issues that it faces. In fact, some of the items that we found to be of interest is there are only records of temperature for 120 years. And anything beyond that is conjecture. It's a approximation. It's not exact. We know that going back, we heard that Al Gore had told us that the polar bears were dying off, except now there's more polar bears than less. We remember in the 1980s that there was a consensus of scientists that at the time were telling us there was global cooling. In fact, going back into the 1960s, we heard there would be a global famine. We've heard about peak oil, running out of oil since the 1940s. There have been many changes: global warming, global cooling, global famine, climate change. It changes almost by the decade on what is this unheard of problem, this concern that we all should be having. And it changes all the time. But we have never heard before where an individual doctor is looking at an individual patient and saying that patient is going to suffer. In fact, we've heard some outrageous things that have been said to us over the years. You maybe remember in 2015, in fact, when we were speaking on Facebook and talking about some of the things that were being alleged by individuals like President Obama, who was talking about climate change being the most prominent issue for the world. In fact, it was one of the dangers of the world, more prescient than ISIS, a bigger threat to the United States and to the world, which we addressed at that time, remembering that China and India didn't care, and looking at the fact that the global temperature, even if we could change it, which would require the effort of every nation in the world, nonstop for an entire decade, and that being the only priority of every nation in the world for a decade, it would still not necessarily change anything that's going on. And we've also seen that many prominent individuals, like Mr. Michael Schellenberger, who is responsible for $150 billion of global renewable energy spending in the Obama administration, coming out, and this was in 2019, when he debunked the renewable energy movement, telling us very clearly it doesn't work. It's not the truth. In fact, he went on to speak about that, and we covered that to some clear extent, again, going back to our article, which was from March of 2019. And in that time, we were speaking about the climate change and some of the exaggerations by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You may remember in 2019, she said, and it was May 13th of 2019, when she said that the world would be ending in 12 years, only to then reverse her position after being debunked by no less than the Associated Press, because there is no scientific consensus on that, when she got embarrassed by the world news media, scientists around the globe saying, that's just not true. Well, then she changed it to, well, that was sarcasm. That was a joke. It wasn't serious. Meanwhile, to this day, many individuals in the Democratic and progressive politics continue to quote her statement, continue to make statements just as she had, that the world is ending in 10 years, in 8 years, in 6 years. Greta Thunberg, among many others, saying the world is about to end, even though there is no scientific consensus to that statement. So we've heard a lot of really outrageous things. And we've been told, well, the answer to that is we have to go to electric energy. We have to go to electric cars. We have to change our world, change our life, because that's the only solution. Because government has told us this will protect us. You may even remember, and when we were talking about this in May of 2020, during the middle of the pandemic crisis, when we were covering this, and we noted that the EPA in 2010 was very clear that electric vehicles, and we will quote from the article we quoted then, a mid-size electric vehicle might have an upstream greenhouse gas emissions of about 180 grams per mile. Meanwhile, a typical mid-size gasoline vehicle has 60 grams of greenhouse gases per mile. This is from the EPA. And we knew this back in 2010, and that information hadn't changed in 2020, even a decade later. So you may say to yourself, well, what does that have to do with this case? Well, the fact is that it's all about the politics. It's not about the truth. In each and every case, renewable energy, electric vehicles, saving the environment, the doom and death of the planet, these are all exaggerations and exuberances that don't actually match up with anything realistic. Again, looking at this story, which you may say, well, Breezy Scroll, that's not a reliable source. You're right, it isn't. Looking at Metro out of the United Kingdom, Canadian woman becomes world's first person diagnosed as suffering from climate change, published on Wednesday, November 10th. And we'll see in this story, it states, a woman has been medically diagnosed as suffering from climate change. This was a medical diagnosis from a doctor, Dr. Kyle Merritt, who is an emergency room doctor in Canada. And he says, her doctor, Dr. Kyle Merritt, wrote, climate change as part of his diagnosis for the woman who suffered from asthma. He admitted that this was the first time he had cited climate change as a cause for a patient's suffering. Quote, if we're not looking at the underlying cause and we're just treating the symptoms, we're just gonna keep falling further and further behind. That's incredible. Climate change will cause you to suffer and be ill. Not asthma. That's not the problem. No. It's climate change. That's the problem. Well, something doesn't seem quite right in that story. And I'm sure most of the news media did not expect you to actually pay attention to the story beyond the headline. They didn't want you to look any further into this because, well, why would you need to do that? And again, you can look at many different news sources on this, and you'll see this. This is Sky News, as they reported on this. Canadian doctor diagnoses woman in British Columbia with climate change after breathing problems during summer heat waves and wildfires. Now, this diagnosis actually happened this summer, 2021. And when you look at the actual stories involved, you'll find that buried at the bottom of the stories, for the most part, is that, first of all, this is a 70-year-old woman we're speaking about. This isn't a 20-year-old woman or a 30-year-old woman, which might have been what you were thinking about if you looked at just the title, or even looking at the pictures, which is where the focus is meant to be. You may not have noticed that this is a 70-year-old woman. Something that even Metro out of the United Kingdom didn't focus on. That's not the main focus. They're not showing a picture of a 70-year-old woman. They're showing you a picture of 20-somethings and 30-somethings at the beach. They want you to think this is about you and me. But really, it's not. It's about a 70-year-old woman who is diagnosed in the middle of a heat wave. And if you go further into the story, this 70-year-old woman in the middle of a heat wave had diabetes and heart failure and lives in a trailer with no air conditioning. Now, you might say to yourself at this point, a 70-year-old woman who has no air conditioning, lives in a trailer with asthma and heart failure, well, maybe her health conditions are the underlying problem is her pre-existing conditions. Her heart failure, her asthma, the poor air quality in her trailer, and the fact that there was a heat wave going on and there had just been wildfires in her region affecting the air quality, having smoke particles in the air. The underlying problems aren't the warming or cooling or changing of the temperature of the earth. has to do with her personal health and the conditions that she lives in. But if you're looking at the news media, you're saying, no, they're going to blame this on the global warming, the global cooling, the global change. And you have to ask yourself, why would this doctor who works out of Kootenay Lake Hospital in Canada, why would he say this? What's his reasoning for saying, well, it's all about health care? Even though he's admitting the woman has diabetes and heart failure and lives in a trailer with no air conditioning in the middle of a heat wave in an area that just had wildfires and smoke in the air. Why is the underlying cause climate change? Well, the reason why it's climate change is because the doctors have a political preference, because they have a political ideology, a progressive ideology. And that's why, because they're using it to promote what they're calling doctors and nurses for planetary health. They have a website. They have an agenda, a political agenda, an agenda that needs to change your lifestyle, that needs to change your ability to live. They want to deprive you of the comforts that you have right now. They want their desires to override your choices and the choices of your government as well. And they're going to blame it on healthcare. They're going to blame it on medicine. They're going to call it science. Science that's unproven. In fact, if we look at the history of climatology, the study of the climate of the planet Earth, if we look at every single prediction made by client scientists, there has never been one that has been proven correct. Not one theory has ever proven correct. New York isn't underwater as we were promised by Al Gore. The polar bears have not died off. The ice caps are larger, not smaller. There is nothing that has ever proven to be correct. The temperature has never hit the levels that we were told that it's supposed to hit. Every single theory has been proven wrong in fact. But that hasn't stopped individuals like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democratic Socialists, and other progressives from saying, well, the world's ending and that you have to change everything in the world, in certain parts of the world, to live up to their desires, regardless of whatever facts may exist. I mean, you've heard Greta Thunberg. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you live a life that isn't dictated by her desires and her wants and needs and her political ideology? And that's really troubling. By the way, if you're wondering, for a 70-year-old woman, what are the chances that she's going to perhaps pass away? If she's in the United States? Well, looking at the number of people who are over the age of 65, which according to the CDC in 2019 were over 2.1 million, a person who's 70 years old, about 170,000 women. Let me say this again. Approximately 170,000 women would die at the age of 70 within a year of hitting that age. 170,000 a year die approximately between 65 and 74 every year. That's incredible. And there's approximately 7.8 million women that are aged 70 to 74 right now. And that's in the United States with better health care than most places in the world, including Canada. And that's assuming that you don't have a pre-existing condition of asthma, heart failure, living in a trailer with no air, in the middle of a heat wave, right after there was a wildfire that put smoke into the air. Does it sound like this is just an extreme, silly example to try and scare you into doing what the government wants, which is to reduce your ability to live your life, to reduce and change the quality of your life, whether you want to or not, because there are progressives who want power over your life. They want to control what you are doing. And I want to remind you, this is being done to promote a political agenda. That agenda is doctors and nurses for planetary health. They already have a page on Twitter. They already have an actual blog. Now, the blog really doesn't have much on it. If you go to the blog, as we have, you'll see there's not much there. They want your name. They want your support. They want you to join this, but they don't really have anything to tell you about what they're doing. This is their about page. We are a group of doctors, nurses, and other health professionals living and working in Kunteas. Well, that tells me you're in Canada. How many doctors? How many nurses? How many scientists? Who funds this organization? What is the goal of this organization? Why did they start this program? They're not really telling you anything. They just want you to submit to their will. They want you to submit to their preferences, and they want to scare you into doing what they want. Again, I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. They want to scare you. That's why when you look at the news media, you're seeing images not of a 70-year-old woman, not of a woman who's living in a trailer with no air. They're showing you a beach. They're showing you 20 and 30-year-old individuals. They're showing you a young doctor. They're showing you every image in the universe except what is actually going on. They want you scared. If you don't do what we say, you're going to live and suffer from climate change because it's a medical condition. No, it's not. That's a lie. That's not the truth. That is a fear-mongering tactic. It's a way to get you to submit your will to what they want. Over and over again. Since 2009, when we started covering this issue, we have seen every prediction that has been made by a scientist, a pseudoscientist, a politician, and individuals with political agendas. Every prediction they have made about the climate is wrong. Every single one. Not one has been proven correct. Not one of the predictions they have made has ever come true. Not one. And they keep changing their story to fit the narrative that you have to do what they say. You have to change this. Now, mind you, we would love to see a clean world. If we want to clean the world, we're happy to see that happen. That's a good thing. It helps everyone. Then again, changing the world to fit the climate change narrative means that we no longer would be able to have an internet. We would no longer be able to travel as we do. It would impact science and technology and the development and growth of the world. That is a negative. It would negatively impact third world nations if we were to follow the climate change agenda that's been put before us. Third world nations wouldn't be able to feed their people anymore. Millions around the world would starve. Millions more would die from heat and cold weather because they wouldn't have air conditioning or heating. It's a problem. And this is a problem that they want to avoid telling you about, but they want you scared. They want you to comply. They want you to think this is a medical condition because you can't question the science or the medicine. Now, can you? We've proven that with the pandemic. You can't question it. And if you do question it, well, then you're a science denier. You're a problem. Well, how can I deny a science that isn't proven? In fact, science is about creating a theory, making a prediction based on that theory, and if that comes true and it is repeatable, then we have a scientific theorem. If it fails, you go back to the drawing board and start over again. That's science, except when it comes to the climate. When it comes to the climate, you just say, well, we're going to be right eventually. Do what we say anyway. Give us your money. Give us your rights. Give up your power, don't have any choice, don't have any voice. Just submit. And that's the scary part behind it all. It's not so much that someone is saying, oh, climate change is a health issue, because it isn't. It's not an individual health issue. Asthma might be, heart failure definitely is, but not climate change. That's not a personal health issue. And to say that, well, you have to do this because the weather is changing. Well, the weather has been changing every day since the beginning of the existence of the planet Earth, long before human beings ever got here and long afterwards as well. We think this is significant. We think this is important because this is propaganda. This is meant to indoctrinate you, and more importantly, to indoctrinate your children, to scare them to do the will and bidding of others. Look at the image that's up here from the 1850s to 2000 showing the temperature increasing. That's not accurate. That's not scientific. That's propaganda. I think this is important. I know we've all been paying attention to the Rittenhouse trial. I know the Second Amendment issues in that case are very important. Looking at how our judicial system is being twisted by politics and individuals who are trying to promote their jobs and their ability to maintain their job, like the prosecutor Binger is doing, that's a problem. And we need to address that. We need to be aware of that. At the same time, it's these little stories that are passing on by that they're just putting through, expecting you only to read the headline and assume it must be true because major news media have covered this, like Sky News, like Metro, that they have put that out there. So you're supposed to say, well, it must be true. A doctor said it. The news media said it. Don't think about it. Just accept it. But we will pose to you, think about it. Do you think a 70-year-old woman is being affected more by the global temperature and climate in Kenya? Or do you think she's being more affected by her asthma and her heart condition that she's had? Do you think those are going to affect her a little bit more? Do you think the weather and temperature in Brazil is going to affect whether or not she's able to breathe well? Or is it the fact that she's in a trailer in the middle of a heat wave without air conditioning? Which one do you think is going to affect her more? Sometimes simple logic makes the most sense. And you have to be aware of this. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you don't get to have an opinion here. We're not progressives. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you believe that climate change, not only is it real, that it's man-made. Maybe you believe that the climate is a health condition, the same as a pandemic, the same as measles or mumps or breaking your arm. Maybe you believe that. And if you do, we'd like to hear your comments because we have a great pause here because this isn't science. That is a fact. It is not science. This is political. But if you have science, we'd love to see it. We've been looking at it since 2009. The science doesn't match the political promises and the political fear-mongering. But we're open to seeing more. But we want to hear what you think. Do you think it's okay for doctors to push a political agenda in hospitals to scare people, to take advantage of 70-year-old women who have health conditions to push in a political agenda? Do you think it's okay for politicians to repeat proven false claims and predictions that don't exist? Do you think that this is more about someone's political agenda and the power that they can receive from putting fear into the public? Or do you think this is really about your individual health? We'd like to hear what you have to say. We look forward to hearing you, and we hope that every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that you'll join us for our live stream where we speak about this and many other issues that are affecting people all over the world. And we want to hear what you have to say. And we will be speaking about the Rittenhouse trial this Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we look forward to hearing your voice about that as well as this issue and many others. Until then, we thank you and we hope you'll be well.